Look at Grandpa's hands shaking, the young officer laughed, pointing at 79-year-old former police chief Harold McKenzie at the shooting range. Bet he can't even see the target anymore. Should we call a medic in case he has a heart attack? The mandatory recertification test was supposed to be routine, but the younger officers had turned it into entertainment, streaming it live on social media. Harold picked up his old service revolver with trembling fingers, the same fingers that had pulled the trigger in the jungles of Vietnam, that had earned him a Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts before he'd even turned 20. The same hands that had held dying brothers in rice paddies, that had saved 17 hostages during the Detroit riots of 1987, that had signed condolence letters to more fallen officers' families than he could count. $20 says he doesn't hit the target once, another officer shouted, his phone camera focused on Harold's weathered face. 50 says he drops the gun, someone else added. The range instructor, a cocky 30-year-old named Patterson, who'd never seen real combat, announced over the intercom. Lane 7. McKenzie, you have 60 seconds to complete your qualification. Try not to hurt yourself, Chief. Harold loaded 6 bullets into his revolver, each one clicking into place with the precision of muscle memory earned over 50 years. His hands were indeed shaking, but not from age or fear. They shook from the same barely controlled adrenaline that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Vietnam, through 30 years of walking Detroit's most dangerous streets, through countless moments when the difference between life and death was measured in milliseconds and millimeters. What happened in the next 60 seconds would be recorded by 12 different phones and the range's security cameras. The footage would be viewed by 15 million people within a week, because those weren't the tremors of a feeble old man. That was the controlled breathing of a sniper who once held a position for 72 hours in monsoon rain, waiting for one perfect shot. That was the steady pulse of a warrior who'd been declared the best marksman the Detroit Police Department had ever seen, a record that stood unbroken for over 5 decades. Harold raised his weapon, and the laughter Everyone was about to learn why some legends never die. They just wait quietly for the moment to remind the world exactly who they are. The Detroit Metro Police Training Facility hadn't changed much since Harold McKenzie first walked through its doors in 1967, fresh from 2 tours in Vietnam with shrapnel still working its way out of his left shoulder. The shooting range had been updated with modern ventilation and electronic target systems, but the lanes were the same. The concrete walls still bore the same acoustic tiles, and Lane 7, Harold's lane, still had the small chip in the floor where he dropped his weapon after being shot during a training accident in 19. It was a Thursday morning in November when Harold received the email that would lead to this moment. The department's new policy required all retired officers maintaining concealed carry permits to pass an annual recertification. At 79, Harold could have let his permit lapse. His wife Margaret had suggested as much over breakfast. But Harold had carried a weapon for 57 years, through war and peace, and he wasn't about to stop now. The morning of the test, Harold arrived at the range at 0800 hours, military time still governing his internal clock after all these years. The parking lot was fuller than expected. When he walked into the facility, he understood why. Word had spread that the legendary Harold McKenzie was coming in for his recertification, but not in the way he might have hoped. Officer Bradley Johnson, a 24-year-old rookie with more Instagram followers than arrests, had seen Harold's name on the schedule and decided it would make great content. Old-timer tries to shoot was how he'd promoted it to his followers. By the time Harold walked in, there were 20 officers present, most under 30, none of whom had served in the military, all waiting for the show. Harold signed in at the desk, his handwriting still steady despite the arthritis that made cold mornings painful. The desk sergeant, a young woman named Davis, looked at him with barely concealed amusement. "Chief McKenzie, you sure you're up for this? The test has gotten harder since your time." Harold simply nodded, taking the ammunition and lane assignment. He'd learned long ago that words were often wasted on those who'd already made up their minds. As he walked toward Lane 7, he heard the whispers and saw the phones coming out. "That's him," someone said. "He looks like he should be in a nursing home." "I heard he was some kind of war hero," another voice added. "Probably made up stories. You know how these old guys exaggerate. Harold set down his equipment bag with the same methodical precision he'd used to prepare for over 10,000 rounds of qualification shooting. Inside was his service revolver, a Smith & Wesson Model 66 that he'd carried since Younger officers mocked revolvers now, calling them wheel guns, antiques. But Harold had never needed more than 6 shots to end a threat. The range instructor, Patterson, swaggered over with the kind of artificial confidence that came from a badge but not experience. Patterson had been on the force for 5 years, all of them spent in suburban districts where the biggest threats were speeding tickets and noise complaints. He looked at Harold's revolver and shook his head. "Chief, we have modern weapons available if you want to use something from this century," Patterson said loudly, playing to his audience. Several officers laughed. Harold opened the cylinder of his revolver, checking each chamber with the same ritual he'd performed before every patrol, every raid, every moment when life and death hung in the balance. "This weapon has saved my life 17 times, he said quietly. "It's never let me down." 17 times, Patterson scoffed. "Sure it has. Look, just try to keep the shots on the paper, okay? We don't want any accidents." Officer Johnson had started his live stream, narrating to his viewers. "All right, everyone, you're about to see why mandatory procurement exists. This fossil thinks he can still shoot. Check out those shaking hands. Probably can't even see the target without those thick glasses." Harold heard every word. His hearing aids, a gift from the VA for damage sustained during artillery bombardments in Vietnam, picked up more than people realized, but he remained focused on his preparation. He loaded 6 rounds, each one a hollow .35-7 Magnum, the same ammunition he'd carried for 40 years. The target was standard police qualification, a human silhouette at 25 yards. Officers needed to score 70% to pass, hitting at least 35 of 50 possible points. Harold had never scored below 98% in his entire career. "Lane 7, McKenzie," Patterson announced over the intercom, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have 60 seconds to fire 6 rounds. The timer starts on your first shot. Try to remember which end the bullets come out of." More laughter. Harold stepped up to the line, his stance slightly wider than regulation to accommodate the hip replacement from 2015, a necessity after decades of chasing criminals through Detroit streets. He raised his weapon in a 2-handed grip, and that's when people noticed his hands were indeed shaking. What they didn't understand was why. The tremor wasn't from age or weakness. It was the same controlled shake that had kept him alive in Vietnam. The body's way of managing adrenaline when every sense was heightened to superhuman levels. Harold had learned to use it, to time his shots between heartbeats, to find the stillness within the storm. Harold took a breath, the same cleansing breath he'd taken before every critical shot of his life. In that moment he wasn't in a sterile indoor range in Detroit. He was back in the jungle, 19 years old, his spotter dead beside him, 12 enemy soldiers advancing on his position. 1 rifle, 6 shots left, no backup for miles. That day, he'd made every shot count. 6 enemies fell, the other 6 retreated. That action earned him his first Bronze Star. His finger found the trigger, applying exactly 4.5 pounds of pressure, just shy of the 5-pound breakpoint. The world narrowed to the front sight, the target beyond becoming sharp in his vision. Despite his 79-year-old eyes, time slowed, the laughter faded, and Harold was alone with his weapon and his target, just as he'd been thousands of times before. The first shot shattered the relative quiet of the range. The bullet hit dead center of the target's head, the electronic scoring system registering a perfect 10. Before anyone could react, Harold fired again. The second shot hit so close to the first that it barely expanded the hole. By the third shot, the laughter had stopped completely. Johnson's live stream chat exploded with messages, but he'd stopped narrating, his phone capturing something none of them had expected. Harold's hands weren't shaking anymore. They were rock steady, moving with mechanical precision. 4th shot, 5th shot, 6th shot. Each one fired exactly 2 seconds apart, each one hitting within a half inch of center mass. The electronic display showed the score, 60 out of 60 possible points. 6 shots. 6 perfect scores. Total time. Harold lowered his weapon and engaged the safety with the same calm efficiency. The range was completely silent, except for the ventilation system's hum. 20 younger officers stood frozen, their phones still recording, their mouths open in disbelief. Patterson's voice cracked over the intercom. Lane 7, your score is—" He stopped, unable to process what he was seeing. Harold ejected the spent casings into his hand, a habit from Vietnam where leaving brass behind could give away your position. He turned to face the watching crowd, and for the first time, really looked at them. These children playing at being warriors, who'd never known real fear, real combat, real loss. "You want to know why my hands shake?" Harold asked, his voice carrying the authority that only comes from absolute competence. "It's not age, it's muscle memory. In Vietnam, I spent 6 months as a sniper. You learn to manage the adrenaline, to use it. The shake isn't weakness, it's the body preparing for survival." He pulled out his wallet and removed a faded photograph, holding it up for the cameras to see. It showed a young Harold in jungle fatigues, surrounded by his squad. 12 men in this picture. I'm the only one who made it home. You know what kept me alive? Not being young, not being strong, being accurate, being disciplined, being ready. Officer Johnson had lowered his phone, his live stream still running but forgotten. "Chief, we didn't know," Harold continued, his voice never rising but somehow filling the entire space. "In 1971, I set the department record on this range. Perfect 300 out of 300. 50 rounds, 50 bullseyes. That record still stands because shooting isn't about age. It's about training, discipline, and respect for the weapon." He looked directly at Patterson. "You asked me to keep it on the paper. I kept it within a half-inch group at 25 yards with a revolver older than you are. You know what that's called? Basic competence where I come from." Patterson's face had gone pale. He knew that score would be automatically uploaded to the department database. Within hours, everyone would know that a 79-year-old retiree had just outshot every active officer in the department. Harold packed his weapon away methodically. As he did, he noticed several of the young officers had moved closer, their mockery replaced with something approaching awe. One of them, a young woman named Martinez, spoke up. "Chief McKenzie, sir. My grandfather served in Vietnam, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine. Did you ever work with the Marines?" Harold's expression softened slightly. "I was attached to the 5th Marines for 3 months in '69. What was his name?" "Corporal Juan Martinez. He was killed in action near Da Nang." Harold closed his eyes, accessing memories he usually kept locked away. "Juan Martinez. Good man. Great Marine. He saved my life during an ambush in May of '69. Pushed me down when a sniper opened up, took the bullet meant for me." He looked at the young officer. "Your grandfather was a hero, real hero, not the kind they make movies about, the kind who did his job every day in hell and never complained." Martinez had tears in her eyes. "He never talked about the war in his letters home. My grandmother only knew he died saving someone. She never knew who." Harold reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was his bronze star. "I received this for the action where your grandfather died. He should have gotten it, not me. Would you give this to your grandmother? Tell her Juan's sacrifice was never forgotten." The range had gone completely silent. Johnson's live stream viewers were witnessing something none of them had expected, a moment of genuine connection across generations, a glimpse into the real cost of the freedoms they took for granted. Patterson cleared his throat, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. "Chief McKenzie, sir, I owe you an apology. The way I spoke to you was disrespectful and wrong." Harold studied him for a moment. "Son, you're what, 30? 31? 32, sir? When I was 32, I thought I knew everything, too. Had been on the force 12 years, survived Vietnam, thought I was invincible. Then I watched my partner die in my arms during a routine traffic stop. Changed everything. You know what I learned that day?" Patterson shook his head. Respect isn't about age or rank. It's about understanding that everyone has something to teach you. The rookie might spot something you missed. The veteran might save your life with experience. Dismiss either one, and you're a fool. Harold turned to address all the young officers. You filmed this for laughs, to mock an old man trying to hold on to past glory. But I didn't come here for glory. I came here because carrying a weapon is a responsibility I've never taken lightly. Every time I've drawn my weapon in 57 years, I've known that my accuracy could mean the difference between justice and tragedy, between saving a life and taking one unnecessarily. He picked up his bag and started walking toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Patterson, you might want to check the range records for 1968 through 1995. I was the department's firearms instructor. I trained over 3,000 officers, including your current chief. My qualification scores are all there. Never scored below 98%. Not once in 48 years. As Harold reached the door, the unexpected happened. Officer Martinez started clapping. Slowly, one by one, the other officers joined in. Even Patterson, humbled and embarrassed, applauded. Johnson's live stream chat was going insane. Thousands of viewers demanding to know more about this legendary officer. Harold stopped at the door and turned back one more time. You want to know the difference between my generation and yours? We didn't need cameras to validate our action. We didn't perform for an audience. We just did the job. But since you got those cameras rolling, let me leave you with something worth recording. He walked back to lane 7, loaded 6 more rounds into his revolver. Patterson, put up a fresh target. Maximum distance. Patterson fumbled with the controls, sending a new target back to 50 yards, double the qualification distance. At that range, most officers struggled to hit the paper at all with a pistol. Harold raised his weapon again. This time, his breathing was different. This was the breathing of a sniper in his hide, waiting for the perfect moment. The range fell silent again. Even the ventilation seemed to quiet. 6 shots, fired in rapid succession, so fast they almost sounded like one extended roar. The target came forward, and Patterson's gasp was audible over the intercom. All 6 shots had hit the exact center of the target, creating one ragged hole no bigger than a quarter. That, Harold said, holstering his weapon for the final time, is why my generation won our wars. Accuracy, discipline, and the knowledge that every shot matters. The video of Harold's shooting display went viral within hours. Johnson's live stream had been screen recorded and shared across every social media platform. Within a day, it had 5 million views. Within a week, 15 million. News stations picked it up, veterans organizations shared it, and police departments across the country used it as a training example. The Detroit Police Department received thousands of emails and calls, all asking about Harold McKenzie. Who was this man? What was his story? How could a 79-year-old outshoot officers a third his age? The chief of police, Harold's former rookie trainee from 1988, held a press conference. He brought Harold's service record, all 14 boxes of it, citations, commendations, newspaper clippings, photographs, 2 Purple Hearts from Vietnam, Bronze Star with Valor device, Silver Star for saving 3 fellow soldiers under heavy fire, Detroit Police Medal of Valor, awarded 5 times, 17 confirmed saves during hostage situation, 312 arrests of armed felons without a single unjustified shooting. But the most powerful moment came when Chief Williams read from a letter in Harold's file, written by a mother in 1993. Officer McKenzie talked my son out of suicide. He spent 14 hours on that bridge, never giving up, never losing patience. My son is alive today, married with 3 children, because this officer saw value in a life everyone else had written off. The mockery Harold had faced at the range transformed into a national conversation about respecting veterans and the elderly. Patterson was required to undergo sensitivity training and was removed from his position as range instructor. He later requested to train under Harold, who agreed, teaching him that true strength comes from humility. Officer Johnson deleted his social media accounts and re-enlisted in the police academy's advanced training program. He would later say that watching Harold shoot changed his entire perspective on what it meant to be a law enforcement officer. Martinez kept the Bronze Star but also started a foundation in her grandfather's name. With Harold as the honorary chairman, they raised funds for Vietnam veterans struggling with healthcare costs, many of whom reached out after seeing the viral video. Harold was invited to speak at police academies across the country. His message was always the same: excellence isn't about age, it's about dedication. I'm 79 years old, half deaf from artillery, walking with a hip replacement, and fighting cancer. But I can still outshoot most of you because I never stopped training, never stopped caring, never stopped believing that accuracy matters. 6 months after the range incident, Harold was at home when his doorbell rang. Outside stood 12 young officers from the Detroit Metro Police. Officer Johnson was among them, looking very different from the cocky rookie who'd mocked him. "Chief McKenzie," Johnson said, "we wanted to apologize properly, and to ask, would you train us, really train us, not just shooting, but what it means to be an officer?" Harold looked at them for a long moment, these young officers who'd learned humility the hard way. "Training starts, don't be late." And Johnson, "Yes, sir, leave the phone in your locker. Real warriors don't need an audience." The training sessions became legendary. Harold, despite his age, taught them things no academy could: how to really see people, not just threats; how to de-escalate with words before reaching for weapons; how to carry themselves with dignity and purpose. But most importantly, he taught them about sacrifice and service. During one session, Harold had them all write letters to be given to their families if they died in the line of duty. "If you can't write this letter," he said, "you shouldn't carry a badge, because this job might ask for everything. You need to be at peace with that." A year later, Harold's cancer returned aggressively. The doctors gave him 3 months. He lived for 8, long enough to see Johnson receive a commendation for talking a veteran out of suicide using techniques Harold had taught him. Long enough to see Martinez become a firearms instructor, emphasizing respect and discipline over bravado. Long enough to see his legacy transform from mockery to reverence. At Harold's funeral, over 3,000 people attended. Vietnam veterans, police officers from across the country, citizens whose lives he'd saved or touched. The honor guard was composed of the young officers who'd mocked him that day at the range. Now transformed by his mentorship, Johnson gave the eulogy. "Chief McKenzie taught us that true strength isn't about youth or physical power. It's about discipline, respect, and understanding that every action we take echoes through time." He was 79 years old and dying of cancer, but he could outshoot, outthink, and outclass any of us. Not because he was special, but because he never stopped earning the right to wear the badge. The shooting range at the Detroit Metro Police Training Facility was renamed the Harold McKenzie Marksmanship Center. Lane 7 was permanently retired, with a plaque reading, "This lane belonged to Chief Harold McKenzie, Vietnam veteran, Detroit police legend, and proof that heroes don't age, they just reload." The viral video of Harold's shooting display became required viewing at police academies nationwide. But more importantly, it changed how a generation of officers viewed their elderly veterans. The hands might shake, the steps might be slower, but the warrior spirit, once forged in the crucible of service, never truly fades. If this story moved you, remember that every elderly veteran you pass has a story of service, sacrifice, and skill that time cannot diminish. They deserve our respect not for what they were, but for what they still are. Keepers of hard-won wisdom, living links to history, and proof that true strength transcends age. Subscribe for more stories of unsung heroes, and share this reminder that respect should never be conditional on youth. Sometimes the oldest warriors have the steadiest aim and the most important lessons to teach.